Welcome to Sundays at 2. I'm Maria Del Rosso. I'm the director of the Fauquier Library, and today we're pleased to have Karen White, the director of the African-American Historical Association, and lots of other things as well. Karen's one of the founders of the museum and a driving force behind the association's Know Their Name project, which seeks to document every person ever enslaved in Fauquier County. For more than 30 years, Karen has been researching her own family lines, and her research continues today. Her research is known nationally. But many of you here today know that she's done so much more, and so we look forward to learning all about it during today's program. We also have with us veteran journalist and editor Lou Emerson, who will lead the conversation with Karen. And that's what these Sundays are all about, a chance to get to know the accomplished botanists, artists, authors, educators, researchers, and the list goes on, who make up and enrich our wonderful Fauquier County. So, a little housekeeping. We will record today's session thanks to Bobby Rankin, and it will be available on the library's YouTube channel in a few days. And of course, these days don't come together, these conversations don't come together with lots of people chipping in, but in particular, Doug Larson, who uses his vast knowledge of the county to bring us these wonderful people to learn about. And so we're grateful to them. After Karen and Lou's conversation, there'll be some time for questions, and then we'll get on with it. So please join me in welcoming Karen White and Lou Emerson.
Thank you, Karen, for making time to be with us today. And congratulations on 32 years of just extraordinary work. What you and your colleagues have created at the African-American Historical Association is unrivaled in my travels around Virginia, with the possible exception of Prince Edward County. The databases, the stories, the artifacts, the museum, it's really incredible. I'm a native Virginian who grew up in the Valley, but my understanding of who we are has grown immensely thanks to your all's work. As I said, it's kind of intimidating once you dive in because there is so much. We could spend a day on any one of those databases, or Reconstruction, or Jim Crow. There are just so many things. But I think to set the scene, I'd like to review the numbers, and many of you know these numbers. But I'd like to talk briefly, as we begin, about the number of enslaved people who arrived in Fauquier, when they got here, and what we know about how they got here. As many of you know, by the dawn of the Civil War, Fauquier was equally divided among black and white residents, people, not all citizens. There were about 800 freed blacks in the county at the time, and about more than 10,000 white folks and enslaved folks. The first African slaves arrived in Virginia in 1619, as I understand it. About 20 people landed at Jamestown. How did we go from there to 10,000 enslaved folks in Fauquier? Where did they land? Where did they come from? Generally, I know we could spend days on that topic, but...
Now, that's a topic yet to be researched by AAHA. But I can honestly say that over the years, we have looked at Fauquier County through the lens of the locals. The locals meaning the people that were born free, people that were enslaved, and the people that owned property here, the landholders. And part of their estate was the people that was doing the labor, whether it be the native population or other immigrants that came into Virginia. But by 1662, we're going from 1619 to 1662, because the first blacks that landed in Virginia were treated as indentured servants, just as other people that were making voyages into Virginia. But by 1662, the institution of slavery became a mainstay, meaning that every child that was born in the state of Virginia to a woman was either free or bond, free or enslaved for life, depending on the mother's status when she gave birth to that child. So if that woman that was here sometime between 1619 and 1662, if she had completed her indenture period, she was considered free, and her children would be free from there forward. But anyone wanting to emancipate a person could only do it by written deed, or a petition. There were different laws that governed everything. And from that point on, as people acquired property, they needed people to work. And it was easier to identify a person of color, of African descent, than it was for another person. Other people could blend into the greater population, but Africans stood out because of their complexion. And they were skilled artisans from the continent of Africa. You had people that were skilled in ironworks and other types of things that were needed in this vast new country.
Again, as long as I have lived here, I was surprised to read in your records that Fauquier County in 1850 had the most improved farmland of any county in Virginia, almost 248,000 acres. And I tend to think of Southside and Tidewater as the places where the larger tracts.
If you look at the census, or the 1870 agricultural census, you'll see the crops and the commodities that were being produced here, but you also needed the labor to produce those commodities. The one thing that I do know, that there were large landholders here in the county. So you have the people that were getting the land grants. So those early land grants, and they were huge acreage. But if you look at the Marshalls and that Marshall extended family, Delaplane, Markham up to Frederick County, Berryville, that whole thing, you're looking at properties of thousands of acres. And if they had thousands of acres and they had 5, 6, 7 farms, quote unquote, or plantations, depending on your understanding what a plantation is, then you see that land, and that land was going to provide crops, and that is going to be exports and imports, and this money. But the largest and the most valuable of anyone's estate was the enslaved population, as seen in the probate records.
And then after the Civil War, the African-American population in the county quickly dropped a significant number. Generally speaking, where did folks go? Philadelphia, Baltimore, D.C.? Was it our proximity to cities and employment on the East Coast? Or?
Yes. It was mostly jobs and educational reasons that people left. Not only that, according to the Freedmen's Bureau papers, they were to document any type of atrocities that were taking place during that Reconstruction era. And there are more than several. There are letters that have been left behind that sets the stage for how people were getting along in the county. And some of them are pretty harsh, as far as wanting to make people that were now emancipated feel that enslavement was better than freedom. So we're going to withhold different things, even the right to vote. So during that convention period of time, the Freedmen's Bureau was here. They were setting up and they were making this transition. They were making sure that people that had those vast farmlands had laborers, and people that were now emancipated looking for a place to live, a place to work, they were drawing up labor contracts between the two. So you'd have these labor contracts. But if you were going to vote, you may lose your labor contract. So we found those records. So it's nothing new what's happening. These are the same type of threats that people get, the same thing that was going on during the Civil Rights era, people that worked here. Oh, you better not go to D.C. You know, so if I have a family that I'm trying to support, maybe I don't want to be seen in DC during the march. I need to feed my family. It's scare tactics, and it is control.
So let's step back a moment and talk about your early life and how you learned Virginia history, where you learned Virginia history as a child. I learned it right across the Blue Ridge, probably using the same textbooks or similar textbooks to what you had. What did you learn as a early and elementary student, and where were you?
Okay. I grew up in the community of Morgantown on the borders of the Free State outside of Marshall. I attended the Morgantown two-room school, but only one room was utilized as a school. And Bernice Cook was my teacher, and she was from North Carolina. And we had a little book called Virginia History Book. And I was the type of kid that if I read a story, really if somebody read the story and I listened, I'd pick up on it more. But I envisioned everything with Sir Walter Raleigh, Pocahontas, and the Civil War. And the story that stood out in my mind so much was how compassionate Robert E. Lee was to his men and how cold the winters were. And the women actually put buttons on the sleeves of their coats to keep them from wiping their noses on their uniform. These are things that I recall very vividly from my fourth grade history book. And one day they said Virginia lost. I was like, what? We lost the war? Then, as I'm going through and I'm thinking about all of these things, I said, gosh, I must have really been a slow learner or something, you know? And I searched for years for that history book. And then when I read this history book, then I realized that it was written in a way that you did not walk away with an understanding as to what was going on or what the war was about. And even today, there's a controversy over what the war was really about, you know? So when you look at this and you think of the times and you think of Virginia as a Confederate state, so I quickly now go to the Articles of Succession, which they highlight slavery. I mean, you know, so that was in their words at that period of time. But that is the way I grew up. I knew Warren Green Building. I knew where that was. I knew where Warrenton was. So I'm thinking of this stuff as a Virginian, you know? And so that was my early years. And then as time goes on, I did not want to be bothered with history because it was all about dates, and I couldn't remember that stuff. It didn't interest me until, well, let me back up. First grade, my first introduction to history was through Mr. Exum, my first grade teacher, and we had Negro History Week. It was a couple of days that we did Negro history, and he taught us spirituals, and to the date, they are my favorite. As a few of you know, Swing Low happens to be my song. You know, I just can't carry the tune, but that was my early things, along with a special that came on Channel 7 or either 4, during that period of time. It was a two-part series on the Underground Railroad, and the first night it went off once Harriet Tubman had been hit in the head and she collapsed on the floor. So I had to wait a whole week to pick that up. But I'm a person who has to be able to relate to something. So when I started doing my genealogy, and the co-founder, Karen King Lavore, was doing her genealogy, we sat outside at a cousin's home, and we started sharing our experiences. And our families went back generation after generation into that community of Morgantown. My great-grandmother taught at that school. Her great-grandfather taught at that school. My great-great-grandfather handed her great-great-grandfather the deed to the property that they had purchased from the widow of the slaveholder. So those are the types of things that once you start going back, you start placing yourself in a time frame of American history. And once I started learning this, I was like, oh my, I know where we were at that time frame because I could not connect to what I was learning in Virginia history. It was like I wasn't there, I was invisible. They weren't talking my language. You know, I didn't understand that. Our cousin who we shared was 80, she and her husband, and we sit back there and she started telling us how we survived during the Great Depression. On the farm that we owned, that Bristol Grigsby had purchased, had an area that had fruit trees. And during the Depression, they grew crops, but they also harvested the fruit. And out at Marshall at the depot, they would take the wagons of fruit out and then ship them north. So they were able to sustain the family that way. And the only thing they had to buy outside of that was provided down at the mill, down at Beverly's Mill.
And all of this, of course, was oral history. There were very few.
Oral history, and I could count on one hand the books that was at the Virginiana Room at the time for research, but that was partly because I didn't know how to research. I didn't know how to dive into the records and to do things, but there was a historian here by the name of Joan Peters who did abstracts for the DAR on the birth records. And our daughter was going to be attending a Christian Baptist school starting in the 2nd grade. And I wanted to make sure that she could relate to who she was when she looked in the mirror. So I went up on Main Street to the New Leaf bookstore and looked for a book. Any books that I could find that would be good for a little 2nd grader of color. And Charlotte quickly purchased books and had them on the shelves for me. But while I was in there, there was this book, Abstracts to Birth of Fauquier County by Joan Peters. She had a little introduction and a foreword. In that book, she mentioned that births were not recorded between 1896 and 1912 by law. They didn't have to record them. Because I found my grandmother's sisters in there that listed them and the parents, but not my grandmother, who was born in 1897. So then I understood what that meant, and then she also had in there where to go to find these records. I started burning up 40 Culpeper Street. I lived at the courthouse, so much so that by 1995, when it was time to flat file the chancery suits in the vault at the courthouse, I was part of that team, so I had the opportunity to look at 21 record series housed at our courthouse in Warrenton. And the Library of Virginia was now going to make a 21st category, which was going to be free Negro and slave. So everything within those 20 record series pertaining to a free or an enslaved person of color, we were to copy it from the original, put the original back where it was, and put them into this new category of free Negro and slave. And on off hours, we index those records. So we have that index to those first records up at AAHA. And after that, that was during the time frame that William Harris was the clerk. Later, Gail Barr became the clerk of the court, and she gave us a special grant to be able to copy those records. So we have copies of those records at AAHA, and they are indexed. So that gives a good understanding of the early people that were here. But there's a book called The Black Laws of Virginia, which June Gill published in 1936, where they abstracted Henning statutes at law and pulled out all of the laws pertaining to blacks, free and enslaved and native people. So you can see in this book these laws. I can look at the newspapers and see some of these laws being carried out, but at the same time as you research, you find out some of them weren't enforced or carried out. It depended on the person in charge and whether someone posed a threat. And it was no different. I haven't found a difference between who you know and who you are as the way things roll. It's the same thing.
So then in 97, you all decided to form the association.
No, actually, we formed the association in 92.
I'm sorry,
92.
I got it back.
Karen, the co-founder, had met some people down in D.C. Her mother was living in D.C., so she lived in Manassas. She'd go down to D.C. So naturally, her job was to go to the archives or the Library of Congress. and she met people from the national chapter of the Afro-American Historical and Genealogical Society. These were the people that started that national chapter. They were friends with Alex Haley, James Walker. These were the who's who of this big organization, and we met them and we worked with them. And they encouraged us to start a local chapter, but we could not afford the dues times two, because it would be the local chapter's dues and you pay also the same amount to the national chapter. Well, when we started, our dues were $2.50 a year, and theirs was like 15 to 25 at that time frame, and we couldn't do that. Plus, we were getting resistance as to whether or not we should even form a chapter here. We had elders within the black community that questioned whether or not we should do that, because things were kind of quiet now. Are you sure you want to, don't you have children in school, Karen? I don't know. Where are you working? You know, so these were questions that were coming up. And we just kind of went ahead on our way. But by this time, we were working with an integrated group of people from the Historical Society here, people from John Gott's group from out at Marshall. I was on his founding board for the Marshall Heritage Association at that time frame of Heritage Society. And when we opened in '97, we had a mixed audience of people that were supported, and that kind of quieted the African American community down, because they didn't feel that we were going to be a threat at that point, threatened. So we went ahead and moved, but we were offered the space in the Plains by the Plains Redevelopment along with Marshall Heritage Society. Marshall Heritage Society got the invitation. I got a separate invitation, and the one for Marshall Heritage was to both organizations. I didn't hear from Marshall Heritage that we had an invitation to go to this space. I went to this space because I received this invitation. They wanted to know what was I doing there. They declined the invitation to open there. We declined because we couldn't afford to pay utilities for the space. So a year later, this was '96 when we first got the invitation. So a year later, they sent it back and said that if you're interested, we're going to rent the top floor of the building where most people know as the Bird Conservancy. We were going to be able to utilize the first floor of that building, the ground level, free of charge. So we moved in and opened on June 14th, 1997. On my lunch breaks, I was working at the court as a deputy clerk by this time frame. On my lunch breaks, I would take my things from my home, from my husband's garage office, and unload them up there, get in my car, eat my sandwich, and go back to work. And I did that from February when we signed the lease until the night before we opened in June of '97.
And what were the ambitions at that point? What were the goals? What did you think it was going to become?
Well, I had different ideas. Now, our founding mission was to preserve, network, and make available, as far as the genealogical files, the museum area, that whole thing. But I was thinking more on the lines of making sure that whatever we could find would be available within each community. Because I grew up in the churches. So I went around to different churches every Sunday or so. We were in church. So naturally, I thought Morgantown could house whatever Morgantown had, and Asheville could take care of Asheville, First Baptist could take care of First Baptist. I wasn't thinking of one big place. But when we opened, we had did 2 or 3 little exhibits there in this 1,400 square foot space, and the community said, this is our museum, and they started bringing in things. They dictated how this was going to be. You know, you quickly overruled, and you know that you have no voice sometimes. So, and people, they just started bringing and started sharing. What I knew from the onset was that this history was more than my history. And my history was just a little teeny bit of American history. And if it had that much of an impact on me, I knew it would do the same for any other kid, because I was a hard kid, still pretty hard when it comes to different things, but I knew that if it could settle me into accepting who I was and how I became to be, it could do the same for others. And I have found over the years that to be true from the response from children. I don't care whether they were black, I don't care whether they were white, whether they came from a free or an enslaved ancestry, people became empowered when they came there. I remember one of the 6th grade classes, I knew this young man's mother. She was a few years younger than me when we went to Northwestern Elementary School. And he came in, he was larger in stature than most of the 6th graders, and he was the last one to come in, and he had his head down when he came in. But by the end of the tour, he was the lead of the tour. He was going around showing everybody everything. And I said, oh my gosh, what have I done here? I have just witnessed this transformation. And then I had another little boy. Now, the first boy was African American. The next boy I want to talk about was a little white boy. We were downstairs in the museum in the space that we occupy now. And he was going around and he saw a picture of the Bethel School. He started pulling everybody over. I know this school. This is on our property. And he gave us the whole thing of how it was transformed and what they were doing with it. So he became the person that everybody was following that day. And it doesn't matter who you are or where you're coming from. If you can relate to something, you have an opportunity to learn and to want more. So the whole idea is to make this history available regardless, because we shared a land here. And I think if we look at it from family land and lines, we can go a little bit deeper and understand if some of you here are descendants of former landholders of Fauquier, and you go back generations of generations. And if you up on that northern section, then 9 times out of 10, my ancestors and your ancestors shared the same land. And if we look a little bit deeper, we may have the same DNA down through generations. Let's face it, it's just the way it is. If you go on the southern end, you might be hooking up with my husband down at Blackwell Town. So it just depends, but you have to be open to the truth and to understand it, because we can't change anything that has happened in the past. We can only move forward. So it's up to us as to how we're going to look at this history and what are we going to do with it. And thank you. Okay, you take it from here.
So in addition to the light bulbs going off for young people, and suddenly you realize that you've harnessed lightning perhaps, were there early donations of artifacts or family photographs or other material that really stood out and kind of rocked you back on your heels because you had no idea it was out there?
A lot. What we have found is that people have visited Africa over the years, and they have brought back artifacts, and they wanted to make sure it was in the museum, such as one of 6th grade teachers who's now retired, but she and her husband traded a bag of T-shirts for a shield and a spear. And she wanted to make sure that they would be in the museum, so when her class would come, she could point this out to them. We have a kente cloth. Angela's sister-in-law came from her husband, I believe. That's part of it. As well as these nice charcoal pictures that date way back. For many of us, we had these large pictures that would kind of scare you at nighttime in the houses that would hang up, that I wouldn't know who they were, and I started asking questions. People just started bringing them, so I thought that we would be able to kind of rotate them out, Public said, no. If I'm giving you a picture, I want it hung. So when my family comes back here for whatever reason, and we're going to be down here, we want it shown, along with military pictures, certificates within the homes. It's just such a vast collection, to be honest with you. We have records from the county, we have records from the school board, we have records from families' homes. So within your home, think about the things that you have in your home. You have Bibles, so we have Bible records. We have graduation certificates, we have association minutes, we have records from churches. The Library of Virginia was microfilming all of the church records free of charge at one time. 2 churches in Fauquier County allowed us to microfilm their records, Ebenezer and Morgantown, so we were able to microfilm those records. That way they're preserved. They're preserved for generations out. But over and beyond that, many of the white churches in the area house their records at the Virginia Baptist Historical Society down in Richmond. It's part of the University of Richmond. So we go down and we start abstracting all of those records. So we're able to look at the white churches that blacks belonged to during the period of slavery, free and enslaved people. And then we're able to look at their minute books, and we're able to see where they were given letters to be dismissed to start the black churches. So we're able to look at that history, and that's powerful. That's powerful to know that history, but it's also powerful to see the writings during the Freedmen's Bureau during this time frame of how, like down at Hearts Delight, people were trying to purchase land so that they could worship in peace, you know, and not be worried with atrocities. But in the minutes, they list the names of the people from Zoar Baptist that were going to start Hearts Delight. So we had those 20-some-odd names. Same thing with Warrenton Baptist here on Main Street. So from there, you went to Zion, to First Baptist, to Mount Zion. So you look at that, and I think it started over there, Broad Run Baptist. So you look at this transformation. But the one thing that I didn't know, and I'm getting ready to go down another rabbit hole, excuse me.
Sorry.
But the one thing I didn't know, people held memberships at these churches, and they could be excluded from membership for being disobedient to their slaveholder by running away, by fornication, by all of these different things. And then they would be given a letter of dismissal to start at another church if they were being sold down south. I mean, when you really get into all this stuff, it's deep. And within the association minutes, one of the big things that they were trying to figure out, what are we going to do if we baptize them? What are we going to do with them? Then are we going to treat them as brothers or sisters? What are we going to do? Oh, no, we better not do that, because if we do that and we welcome them in, they might be sitting at the table with their wives. So we don't want to do that. All within the association minute books, I kid you not. Wow. Baptist Historical Society. So anyway, let me be quiet now.
Fascinating. So let's just walk through the association's progress a little bit. Some of the projects, we'll get to know their names in just a second, but the mapping project that you collaborated with PEC, you talk about obviously the importance of place, the many, many dozens and dozens of villages with churches and schoolhouses around the county. How did that all come to fruition?
Over the years, as we research, we look for any place or any type of record that contains information on people of color in Fauquier County. So we know that the county itself has 20-some different databases or record sources, which would be your wills, your deeds, your birth, your death, marriages, and name it, chancery suits, land disputes. So you go through all of those records and you start abstracting the names out. But then they also had the voter registrations, they had the voter league and logs and things like that. So you pull those records. Tax records, you start pulling those. Because I had envisioned a map that would have all these different sources on it. Okay, so if I had a map and I wanted to see where people got baptized, I'd like to be able to have that on a thing or overlay over top of a map for that. I'd like to see one with the cemeteries. I'd like to see one with the churches. I'd like to see ones with the schools. And I've talked about this for years, since around 2000. We had received a cost share grant through Virginia Tourism, and we were supposed to highlight 5 African-American communities. But when I started looking around, one community didn't outweigh the other. I said, well, I can't pick 5 because I'd be prejudiced. I'd do the ones that I'm most familiar with, the ones where I grew up. But that wouldn't be fair. So what I decided to do was to go around and look at every community where there was a church and a school. So I came up with about 30, 31. Because I figured if it was a church and school, then that was considered the larger community. And I felt like if I highlighted those, then we could say that we hit the communities and I wasn't being self-serving, okay? So with that, different people went with me out to these different locations. I know I worried my husband a little bit, and other people as well. So I had to research the deed references as to where did they get the property from, get the PIN numbers, to put a pin in it, and then to go over to the county with Dan Still, GIS department, to work on that part. So that was around 2000. And from that point, I had started this thing of wanting to map, and I never let go of it. And I worked with PEC to do some of the cemeteries. We went out on site and did cemeteries between that time frame. And then, I guess it was close to, it was pre-COVID, we were working on mapping, a story map, to where this story map would highlight stories of significant places. So we were looking at churches, schools, and communities. So we had to build out a narrative for all of this, but we had a lot of the information as far as the actual physical location where we could pin that site. And PEC was going to apply to the Path Foundation to do this grant. So they oversaw it. They put everything on the map for us, and we provided the content for it. And that was a big portion of where we started. And from that point, people became more aware of what we were doing because it received more publicity, and people were more in tune during this period of history than they were earlier on. So that's how we got started with that, and it just grew.
And I see one can go in there and add photos if you want to contribute.
Yes, you're able to add photos.
Are there other plans for the map? Or is
Yes,
it gonna
yes,
be-
there are other plans. We're hoping to put in the cemeteries. We have not completed the cemeteries as of yet. Any place, I would love to do the baptism sites. I would love to do the sites of the black baseball games as well as the black horse shows. They should be highlighted as well. So it's bits and pieces of the historical content that we have not yet completed because we need more hands-on and more money and a larger space.
Let's jump ahead briefly to know their names, which sounds like an incredible task.
Yeah.
Do we have any idea what the total number of enslaved people in Fauquier might be?
I could not guess because right now we're looking at every source that's out there, and we may find a person in a deed reference to where they're being put up as collateral for someone's property, and then that person may have passed and now they're in probate records. So we may find Mary in 2 places. And then we may find that after the war, Mary became free and she's on the 1870 census. So that could be 3 places, 3 different Marys. But we want to make sure that Mary is calculated in every place that she is, along with any other pertinent information, because some of it gives descriptions, some give ages, some give parentage. So whatever's within our databases, we want to make sure that we include that information. What we're building is very much the foundation to build out and to do studies from. So right now, we have over 77,000 entries.
Now, does that represent, each entry represent a human being?
Yes.
70,000 people, wow.
Yeah.
That's exciting. And what, to your knowledge, is the earliest person or earliest people?
One of the earliest things that I have found, because we're looking at Fauquier, 1759, with the formation of Fauquier, one of the earliest loose papers I picked up was pertaining to a man by the name of John Dooling, who was in jail. And his complaint was that he did not want to be in the cell with a person of color. So I know that there was a person of color in jail with John Dooling in 1759. So it just kind of goes forward. But there were people here during that early period, during the tidable time frames, pre-revolution. I would say that there were over 5,000 names that are listed on the tidable list. And that includes multiple years. So multiple times these people may be listed 4 or 5 times. But there were several listings like that. So you're going to find them in the tidable list. You're going to find them in the Free Negro Register, because 1793, if you were a free person of color, you had to carry a pass with you to go anywhere. If your wife was on one plantation and you were free or enslaved and working on another plantation, you couldn't just go and visit. You had to have a pass with you. Or if you were free and you wanted to get a job, you had to have a pass to go. And the Historical Society in Richmond housed Fauquier counties when we found it back in '93. And Lee Shepard from the museum and William Harris from the clerk's office gave us permission to abstract and to publish that book. And that has 845 entries.
A lot of detective work.
Yes, it is.
Wow. Was it more common for folks to escape bondage here than farther south because of our proximity to the north? What do we know about the Underground Railroad and the quest for freedom among enslaved people here?
Now, that's one of the maps we want to do. We would like to do. We would like to map all of the elopement sites. Every site that people left from, we would like to put a pin there. And then when we find references as to how they, and the route that they took, we want to pin those as well. And we've got a couple of them going strong right now. But yes, it was easier to escape from here than it was down south. Down south was harsher from what I understand, far as the ability to escape in areas that were totally secluded. And when you're surrounded by waterways and different things. So there was a law that you weren't supposed to be a boatman, because if you were a boatman, you would have access to the water. So just like you weren't supposed to have or conduct any type of burials or rituals at night. Perfect time to plan an insurrection. You were not supposed to, I mean, it's just all kinds. You weren't supposed to administer medicine, because there were roots and berries that people knew were poisonous. And blacks were brought up on charges for arsenic killing, ground glass, fires. It was a lot of different types of resistance. Running away was just one of them. The court is full of those suits.
Let's talk a little bit about the future before we open it up for questions. You have an opportunity now to buy the real estate. What does that mean, and what's the future look like for the association?
Okay. June of last year, our leaseholder, which is the Plains Redevelopment Corp., They offered us the opportunity to purchase the building that we are currently in, along with the building next door, which connects underground to the building that we're in. And that's the building where the American Bird Conservancy was. And that is the building where we started in '97. We moved to the building that we're in 2001. So it's currently empty with the exception of one person leasing one section of it. We have an opportunity to buy it by the end of the year for $1.2 million. And we have a campaign fundraiser that's working to make grant proposals to foundations and other places. We have several $100,000 pledges. We have 2 pledges along with $400,000 each, and then one actual grant for $50,000 that has come in, and the possibility of another pledge for $25,000. So you can see that we are far away from the goal. But we are currently doing an audit for our books for 2023 in order to apply for a couple of larger foundations that actually fund this type of purchase. So we don't know how it'll turn out, but we're going to take advantage of the opportunity and try, because it would be great for us in the sense that we may become self-sufficient as an organization, because that other building, part of it could be leased out to bring in some money to help offset the regular expenses there, and it may not happen at all. I don't know. But we're trying for it because it could be beneficial to the community as well, because there are other nonprofits that are looking for space, and then there are other people that are looking to rent a space. So I don't know how it will all play out, but right now we have volunteers that are helping us with various aspects of our programming and our projects, such as Know Their Names, Virginia 250, the school board minutes, and some other things. And our research is in high demand from the public, by phone calls, by walk-ins, by emails, queries that we're picking up off the website. One of the other projects that we're involved in is called Unbound, and that's with the Virginia Museum of History and Culture down in Richmond. And they're wanting to document free blacks across Virginia. One of those free blacks they became aware of because of Know Their Names, and that man that was free was Hezekiah Gaskins, and he's from that Markham area. He purchased his wife and 3 daughters from Edward Carrington Marshall, who is Chief Justice Marshall's son. And Jim Stribling, one of the volunteers that worked with us, he has a mass amount of family documents and journals and account books. And within his account books from Dr. Stribling, Hezekiah is in those books and within those pages. And we know that he built a meat house there, and he was charged so much, and he paid back. And then in 1871, he deeds Hezekiah's wife Fanny 25 acres of land on Naked Mountain, because he said that Hezekiah is now deceased, but he owed him for some work that was done. So they're coming and wanting to see this. So in October, we're going to welcome Gaskin's descendants to the Beulah Baptist Church for a meet and greet, and then to go over to Heartland Orchard, where Hezekiah lived and worked, and look at that meat house. And this will be a gathering, but this is some of the work that we're doing, that we're involved in.
In just a second, yes, you've got the mic. I don't want to monopolize, so we'll open it up for some audience questions if anybody would like to pose one.
And we'd like for you to use the mic because we're recording, so we'll be able to hear your question. So, questions?
There we go.
Hi, I'm an invader from Loudon, but I'm particularly interested in land use and occupations, land ownership patterns. Is that, I assume that's some of the information that can be gleaned from some of the documents that you're accumulating, or not?
Yes, the U.S. Census will give you information on the different jobs that people were, the skilled artisans, whether they were farmers or whether they're blacksmith, carpenters. All of those are going to be on a 10-year span that you can pick up off the census. And then, of course, the 1870 agriculture census you can pick up as well. And then far as land ownership, within the deed records itself, will give you an idea of who was owning property and where. And the large emancipation sections of the county gives an idea of where these communities were. If you look where the churches and schools of Fauquier County are on the story map, you will find the hearts of these communities where people were buying property. And then you'd be able to do the research backwards from there.
There's a question here.
With respect to the passes that were given to freed or enslaved men or women, was this a form of power? And if someone took away your pass, how would you get one reissued?
By law, every 3 years they were supposed to be issued a pass if they needed one. I don't find many repeat passes in Fauquier's book. There was a group from the Continental Army that were considered patrollers, and those patrollers had the right to go from door to door, house to house, knock down doors and look and to check the goings and comings of free and enslaved blacks. And within the deed books, you'll find the recording of the appointments of the patrollers. And if someone lost a pass, you would be able to go back to the clerk's office where they were supposed to be housed and get a new one, but you would always have to have a white person to go on your behalf with you to testify for you to actually get another pass.
So basically you aren't free.
Well, I'm going to give you an example. My great-great-grandfather, Douglas Ford, through oral history, shared what it was like to be enslaved. And he's on the free census. He is one of the men that was called out by the Confederacy to do labor during the Civil War for the Confederacy. And to my surprise, I found out that he was a free man of color. And then when I realized that there were little differences as to what your rights were, then I realized how the system was set up to control. And right now, if I go on Facebook or different things, I see controversies about Christianity and different things of that nature, far as whether or not we should believe or not believe according to whether blacks were taught to believe so that they could be controlled. But then I realized that there were different scriptures that were taken out of content during that time frame. There was even Bibles that were published to support the institution of slavery, such as the Stringfellow Bible, which we have a copy of it at the Plains. So we find that there are all types of things that were published to indoctrinate and to do different things for supremacy and for control. And I'd say, yes, it was all about control. And I didn't understand that until I started reading the Southern Claims. When I started reading the Southern Claims, which is some claims where people were in a Confederate state, lost property to the Union, but remained loyal to the Union. And within that, people were telling about what they were seeing during this time frame of war on the home front. And I saw where these women were testifying about the devastation, and they were concerned about who's going to get in the peas, how we're going to do this, how we're going to do that, or I started reading the journals. Then I understood that these people were indoctrinated into a lifestyle of privilege. and they had no idea what it was like not to have that privilege. So they were upset and still upset about that loss of property and money.
One of the most interesting programs that we could get online this year was an oral history of the time before desegregation, when education in Fauquier was so different, and particularly that Black children were not offered public transportation to school. They had to find their own way, and the substandards. AAHA owns Morgantown School now.
Yes.
And I wondered if you could talk about how you might interpret that, its history going all the way back and up to that era. Thanks.
Yes, AAHA does own the Morgantown Schoolhouse property. Dr. Sheila Johnson deeded that property right around 2001, I believe. And we have just recently received approval for zoning to start moving forward with getting the groundwork and the building prepared for restoration and interpretation. The property itself goes back to around 1890-ish, early 90s. And prior to that, the old church served as school and church and social hall for the community. But once that started, we found teachers registered for the schoolhouse that entire time until it closed when Fauquier closed 7 schools on the northern section and opened the Northwestern Elementary School. So we're going from separate to separate and equal, quote unquote, by building Northwestern, Southeastern, Central. But those schools still weren't equal, but they were a lot better. We had bathrooms when we went to Northwestern. We had a cafeteria, and we had heat in the rooms without having to go down and bring in the wood or the coal. So we would like to be able to interpret all of those things. We were very fortunate to work with the Montessori school in the Plains area, Belvoir, and they actually transplanted the yucca plants and different things that were outside, and they're putting them on their property until our grounds are cleared up for them. And they were able to pull, I think, over 300 or 400 artifacts from the crawl space of the school. So they have actually cataloged all of those. The instructor there has cataloged all of those records, which will be going into Past Perfect into our museum software program. But we would like to be able to interpret those. One of the things was a textbook, and it had the name of the person who owned this textbook, and it belonged to one of the white families out at Marshall that one of the Black families worked for. So, I mean, you know, when we're going to tell the story, we're going to tell it to the best of our abilities. So there are many ways of interpreting it, along with the property that is across the street and down the hill where the spring was on the Miles property, where the older boys would go down with the pails of water and bring them back up the hill and put them into the crocks, into the other room for us to have water to drink during the daytime, where we played softball, the bathrooms that was outside, a girl's bathroom and a boy's bathroom, and then you would, in order to go to the bathroom. So these are all stories that we would be trying to tell, but also the community part of it, where the teacher often boarded within the community and often was in church, often given membership, watch care membership at the church while she or he was there, and often helped with the different programs of the church, whether it be Sunday school or the Christmas programs or the pageants or raising money for the Red Cross or March of Dimes. I was trying to think of the dimes with the heart because we had all of those cards in school. So it's lots of different things that we would be trying to interpret, but what we were trying to do is to capture the oral histories of those students that are still with us. And I think our oldest one is getting nearer to 90 now.
I'm curious, you mentioned that the curriculum when you were in the second grade was not something that you felt you could relate to. What do you think currently is the status of the way we are teaching about slavery and enslaved peoples and our history in our current curriculum?
I can't address the entire curriculum. I can address people, educators that are coming into the facility and they're trying to build out, utilizing their classrooms, utilizing the resources that we have at the Plains. I do know that there are active teachers that are involved in that. I can't speak for all of the teachers, but I do know that on occasion we have had one or two teachers that really weren't that engaged when they came, and others who were just totally engaged with their students and doing that tour ahead of time, wanting to make sure that they were able to pull and to make things available to their students that they deemed necessary and important. And with the museum itself, we worked with the school system, private and public, to see what they needed that we might be able to assist them with. So I can't really say a whole lot about it. I am concerned about the textbook situation and what things are going to be appropriate or not appropriate. I'm concerned about those things, but I'm a little out of that section now simply because I don't have children or grandchildren in my household to know firsthand. And my plate is so full.
Any other questions?
It's not a lot now that comes through. We may have 200, 300, 400 students that may come through. In some years, not that many. In other years, it could be a little bit more. But they're from private and public school, as well as girls and boys clubs, different places out of the county for people with different types of learning abilities and inabilities.
But you have about 10,000 visitors a year in person and online? Something
no,
more
online,
than that now?
Online, we have probably close to 20 or more. And that's throughout the U.S.,
Yeah.
which really surprised me.
We
We were doing our analytics, and I was like, oh.
I was in there last Wednesday and talked to a gentleman from Germany whose wife had connections here, and he had a global view and a historical view of slavery that fascinating. One more question. Is it any easier today to tell difficult stories than it was when you started?
Yes, I would say yes, definitely, because I think, and now I have staff members that are here that are equal in roles, okay, to mine and anybody else's. So they may want to address this. But I believe during the period of George Floyd's death and COVID, I think the world was shut in at a time when they could look beyond what they were doing within their immediate nucleus, and they could see the world outside. And I think that pause gave us time to look at ourselves in the mirror and to think, okay, I don't know anything about this. Did this really happen? Or I don't agree with different things politically, or I do agree with it. But I think it gave time for us to think about things. And ever since then, we have had an influx of people that are coming in from Fauquier County and surrounding counties that want to sit at the table and to talk. They want to feel welcomed, and we've had more than one person, probably more than 5 or 6, that have come in saying, we don't know how you will receive us, but we want to be part of this. We want to do something. What can we do? I don't understand this. Where do we go from here? People tend to want to be loving. They want to be understanding. But sometimes we have such baggage that we kind of keep picking up the stuff instead of just leaving it alone and, trying to find a way forward. But I think we have to communicate, and we have to find a way of looking at this history of this land and these people, because it's our land and our people. So we can't deny it, and for so long, I was one of the first people to deny part of who I was. I'd get to a certain point, and that was not me, and I'm talking about my white heritage. If I would get to a white person that I knew I was descended from, drop it off. I look in the mirror, I don't see anything white about me. So that wasn't me. I didn't grow up with that mindset. But I went to a conference in Richmond. It was the Sister to Sister conference. Dr. King's daughter was there. And I was supposed to talk about researching Black history and genealogy. So one night around 2 o'clock in the morning, this light bulb went off. Talk about who you are and look at the richness from 16 bloodlines. If I go back to my great-great-grandparents, I have 8 on daddy's side and 8 on mommy's side, so I did a color line for every one. And then by the time it get down to me, I'm enriched in 16 different bloodlines. And then I realized that, okay, you're a hypocrite. So then I said, okay, this is where I am. So now I got to do a little bit better. So I'm a work in progress, okay?
Wow. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Karen and Lou. This is, as always, we hope a very informative conversation, and I just want to call your attention to the fact that on November 24th, and there's a notice on your chair, we will be doing another not necessarily a conversation, because we are privileged to have Ken Garrett presenting. And because Ken is such a famous photographer, and his images from all over the world, and principally now I think he'll be focusing on his work in Egypt. But Ken, for those of you who don't know, has worked for over 40 years with National Geographic, has traveled to all 7 continents as a photographer of some considerable renown, is responsible for numerous covers of the National Geographic, and has a really truly distinguished career. And because his imagery will be so important, we have asked Highland School to host that lecture so that we will have really wonderful projection capability, which brings me around to our status on this particular building, which for those of you who are regulars at this series of conversations, you may recall the last conversation we had, I mentioned that we were in the process of developing a plan to revitalize this building, which is 100 years old this year. It was built in 1924. So on the 100th anniversary of this building, we thought it would be useful for the library's purposes to have a facility which could accommodate projection, which means darkening this room, a built-in projection screen, a better sound system, a number of things to enhance the acoustics in this room. And so we have begun, and I mentioned really quite informally last time, because we really had not received all the bids from the vendors and didn't have our full scope of work in mind. But did mention that we would be doing this, and I'm pleased to say that someone, and truly it remains anonymous, but it has to be someone who attended that lecture, presented us with an anonymous $10,000 check. So and we've had a couple other contributions as well. So we're sort of on our way to our goal to help renovate this building. We are really waiting on a couple grants that have been submitted, and we're waiting for the results of that to really see exactly where we're at which point we'll begin a more public campaign. But we are off and running on the renovation of this building, and hope that by next year we'll be able to offer even better kind of acoustics and audiovisual capability here in this building. But Please keep in mind on the 24th that Ken will be at Highland School, not here at the John Barton Payne Building, and we think it'll be also a very exciting lecture. And thank you again to Karen and the remarkable work of the African-American Historical Association. It's really a model that is quite exciting, and I know has served around the country as a model. So we appreciate you sharing your experience with us. Thank you.
Thank you